Story 1. The Pink Veil, inspired by the 1952 London fog. Dr. Michael Brown had not slept in 4 days. Not properly. The Great Smog of 1952 had clawed its way into London on December 5th, and by the 8th, it had transformed his beloved city into a sulphurous, yellow-green purgatory. As a senior researcher at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Michael had worked tirelessly. His sharp mind and steady hands a bulwark against the tide of respiratory failure and death that flooded their wards. He had seen grown men weep for air like newborns, and watched the light fade from the eyes of the elderly as their lungs filled with the poisonous cocktail of coal smoke and industrial fumes. He was a man of science, a believer in cause and effect. There was a reason for this, a deadly confluence of weather and pollution. It was a nightmare, but a logical one. On the afternoon of December 9th, a change came. The dense, choking yellow fog began to thin. A fragile hope flickered in the exhausted hearts of the hospital staff. But it was a false hope. As the gray-yellow miasma receded, it was replaced by something else. It rolled in from the Thames not as a thick blanket, but as a light, almost ethereal mist. And it was pink. Michael first saw it through the frosted glass of his office window. The color was delicate, beautiful even, like a diluted rose. But within its shifting currents, there were flashes, neon pinks and violets that sparked and died like silent lightning. A cold dread, entirely different from the grim exhaustion he felt, settled in his gut. This was not natural. He grabbed a military-issue gas mask from his office, a relic from the war he'd kept as a memento, and hurried outside. The scene that greeted him was one of utter chaos. A woman, a nurse he recognized from the pediatric ward, was standing in the middle of the street, her arms outstretched, a look of profound terror on her face. She was screaming, but not at him. She was screaming at the empty air in front of her. "No, Mama, please don't. I didn't mean to. The fire wasn't my fault." A few yards away, a constable was on his hands and knees, barking orders like a dog at a cobblestone, his face contorted into a snarl of primal rage. An old man, usually a gentle soul who sold newspapers by the gate, was laughing hysterically, pointing at the sky and shouting about angels with swords of fire. The pink mist, the veil, as the papers would later call it, was not killing their bodies. It was shattering their minds. Michael pressed the mask tighter to his face, the rubber seal a flimsy barrier against his psychological terror. He saw a young boy, no more than 10, crouched by a lamppost, rocking back and forth. His lips were moving, whispering a frantic, unintelligible prayer. Michael approached him, but the boy flinched as if struck, his eyes wide and unseeing. "The voices," the boy whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "They're in the fog. They're telling me to come home, but it's not my home. It's a hole in the ground." This was beyond science. This was a waking nightmare painted in pastels. Back inside the hospital, which he had ordered sealed, Michael found a plain envelope on his desk. His name was typed on the front. There was no stamp, no postmark. It hadn't come through the mail. Inside, a single line of text. "There is something behind the shadows. I know the truth. Room 10. Now." Room 10 was a disused storage closet in the oldest part of the hospital. A damp, forgotten space. It had been locked for years. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct told him to stay put, to wait for this madness to pass. But the scientist in him, the desperate need for an answer, was stronger. He made his way through the dim, silent corridors. The hospital was unnervingly quiet, the usual bustle replaced by the muffled sobs and mutterings of the afflicted who had been brought inside. He found room 10. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The room was pitch black and smelled of old earth and rust. A voice, low and gravelly, emerged from the darkness. "Close the door, Dr. Brown." "Who are you?" Michael demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "What is this? What's happening to my city? My name is unimportant. What matters is that the test was a success," the voice said, with a chilling detachment. "Test?" Michael whispered, the word tasting like poison. "Thousands are dead from the first fog. And now, this? This is a test? A necessary one. The first fog was a control, a naturally exacerbated event. We simply encouraged the conditions. Provided the right quality of coal, the perfect recipe for atmospheric particulate, it was a brilliant cover. The world blames a weather anomaly. But this, the voice continued, a hint of pride creeping in, this pink veil is the real achievement. Michael's blood ran cold. You're telling me this is a chemical weapon? A goddamn hallucinogenic agent deployed on our own city? Not a hallucinogen, the voice corrected calmly. It's a frequency. A specific electromagnetic frequency broadcast on a carrier wave of ionized particles. It doesn't create the visions. It merely lowers the threshold. It peels back the layers of the conscious mind. What they see, the dead mothers, the demons, the angels, that's all already in there. Guilt, fear, trauma. The fog just lets it all out at once. It's the truth serum to end all truth serums. Imagine what we could learn from an enemy population if we could make them scream their deepest, darkest secrets at the top of their lungs. Michael felt the world tilt. The war was over, but the battles had simply moved into the shadows. The Cold War, the arms race, the espionage, it had all come home to London, hidden in a fog. You're a monster, he breathed. I am a patriot, the voice replied sharply, but I came here to offer you a choice, Doctor. You have a brilliant mind. You've seen the effect firsthand. We need someone to document the long-term effects, to refine the compound. Join us. Help us perfect it. Or you can walk out that door and try to forget everything you've heard. The choice was no choice at all. Michael Brown was a healer. He took a step forward, his fist clenched, ready to drag the man from the shadows. But as he moved, he heard a soft click. A small metallic canister rolled across the floor at his feet, hissing as it released a small puff of pale pink gas. He stumbled back, but it was too late. He inhaled a wisp of it. The world didn't spin. It shattered. The darkness of the room peeled away, and he was standing in his childhood home, watching his mother die again, her face a mask of pain. Then he was in the field hospital during the war, a young soldier begging for Michael to save his legs, his eyes full of trust. Guilt he didn't know he carried, fears he had buried for decades, came flooding back in a deafening, cacophonous wave of horror. He heard the voice one last time, distorted and echoing, as he sank to his knees screaming, "Welcome to the other side, Doctor." When they found him the next morning, as the pink veil finally lifted, Dr. Michael Brown was sitting in the corner of room 10, his back to the wall, his eyes wide open but utterly vacant. He was alive, but his mind was gone, forever trapped in the personal hell the fog had unlocked. He was a living testament to the true horror of that day, a horror that had nothing to do with pollution and everything to do with the monsters we carry inside ourselves. Story 2. The Daring Woods Light, inspired by the 1930 phenomenon. Eleanor Vance had lived in the village of Pluckley her entire life. She knew its reputation, the most haunted village in England, and she dismissed it with the good-natured skepticism of a local. The ghosts were for the tourists, a charming bit of folklore to sell postcards and ale. The daring woods, which bordered her small cottage, were her sanctuary. She knew every path, every hidden glen, every ancient oak. So, on the chilly afternoon of February 18th, 1930, when she saw the fog rolling in, she felt no fear. It was just a fog. But this fog was different. It wasn't the damp, clinging gray mist she knew. As it wove its way through the skeletal winter trees, it began to glow. It was a soft, phosphorescent luminescence, like moonlight trapped in water. It pulsed gently, with a rhythm that felt almost organic. Intrigued rather than afraid, Eleanor, a practical woman with an artist's eye, grabbed her sketchbook. She wanted to capture this strange, beautiful light. She entered the woods, following a familiar deer track. The glowing fog grew thicker, the light intensifying until it seemed to emanate from the very air around her. The silence was absolute. No birds, no rustling of small animals, no wind in the branches. The world had been reduced to a silent, luminous bubble. Then she heard the whispers. They weren't words, not exactly. They were like the memory of a conversation, a susurrus of tone and inflection just beneath the threshold of understanding. It felt ancient and utterly indifferent to her. The feeling of being watched, a sensation she'd never felt in these woods before, became overwhelming. It wasn't a single pair of eyes, but a multitude, all fixed on her from within the glowing veil. Suddenly, the fog ahead of her began to swirl. It didn't dissipate, it coalesced. The luminescent particles drew together, spinning faster and faster, until they formed a column. Then, it shifted, elongated, and took on a shape. It was vaguely humanoid, but impossibly tall and thin, with long arms that seemed to stretch toward her. It had no face, only a brighter concentration of light where a head should be. But Eleanor felt its attention focus on her with the weight of a physical blow. It was beckoning. One long, luminous arm lifted, and a single, articulated finger curled towards her, inviting her deeper into the wood. Eleanor, a woman who had never believed in ghosts, felt her primitive brain override a lifetime of logic. This was not a ghost. This was something else. Something that wore fog like a body. She turned and ran. She burst from the tree line, her lungs burning, and didn't stop until she reached the local pub, the Black Horse. She spilled her story to the barman and a few grizzled farmers. They exchanged glances. They had seen the light from their windows. Some had heard the whispers on the wind. Over the next week, a half-dozen other villagers confessed to having similar encounters. One old poacher claimed it spoke to him in a tongue that sounded like water gurgling over stones. A young mother said it showed her visions of people who weren't there, walking through her kitchen at night. The rational world tried to assert itself. Theories were floated: swamp gas, a rare electrical storm, mass hysteria. But then, a week to the day after Eleanor's flight, a local farmer named Arthur Sinden made a discovery that silenced the skeptics. Deep in the heart of Daring Woods, at the very spot where Eleanor had described seeing the figure, the ground was scarred. It was a perfect circle, about 20 feet in diameter. The earth inside was scorched black, baked to the consistency of pottery. Not a single blade of grass, not a single weed, not even a worm survived within that ring. The soil was sterile, dead, as if it had been subjected to an unimaginable focused heat. Yet the surrounding area, the trees just inches from the circle's edge, were untouched, still covered in their winter bark. The scorched earth became a pilgrimage site. Scientists came from London with instruments. They tested the soil, looking for radiation, for chemical residue, for any explanation. They found nothing. The soil was simply cooked. The story of the luminous fog and the circle of scorched earth became inextricably linked. The ghost of the Daring Woods light was born. Eleanor never went back into the woods. She could still see the glow from her bedroom window on foggy nights, a faint beck glimmering deep within the trees. She took to keeping her curtains tightly drawn. She knew what the rationalists refused to accept. The fog hadn't just been in the woods. It had been a door, and something had stepped through. The scorched earth wasn't a landing site or a meteor strike. It was a mark, a signature, a claim. The thing in the fog had touched the earth, and the earth had been burned by its presence. And on quiet, foggy nights, when the whispers started just outside her window, Eleanor could still feel it watching her, patient and eternal, waiting for her to finally accept its invitation. Story 3: The Ones Who Wait. Inspired by Native American lore, my grandfather, Nicholas, was the last real shaman of the Nipmuc tribe. He lived in a small shack on the banks of Nichols Pond in Connecticut, a place where the 5-mile river slows down and spreads out, creating a sheet of dark water that reflects the sky like polished obsidian. He taught me to see. He taught me that the world is not just what we perceive with our eyes, but a series of layers, all existing simultaneously. And the fog, he said, was the lens. "See that, Leah?" he'd whisper, pointing a gnarled finger at the morning mist that clung to the pond's surface. To anyone else, it was just a beautiful, peaceful sight. But to me, after years of his teaching, it was a curtain. The water is between states, he'd explain. Not quite liquid, not quite gas. It's a halfway place, and the dead, they live in the halfway places. He told me about the Assawaga, the river's old name, meaning the place between. It was a borderland, a thin space where the spirits of those who had come before could walk among the living. He pointed to the old mill ruins downstream, the skeletons of the textile factories that had once employed my own grandparents. He said the mill workers who had died in his machines, who had coughed their lungs out from the cotton dust, who had simply worn down and given up, they never left. They were tied to the water that powered their lives. Every morning we would sit on the porch as the fog rolled in, a thick, gray blanket that erased the far shore, and within that blankness, I learned to see them. At first, it was just flickers, movement in the corner of my eye. Then, as I grew, the images became clearer. I saw them walking on the water, men in flat caps and suspenders, women in long, simple dresses, their faces pale and worn. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, walking not on the surface of the pond, but through it, their figures solidifying in the fog before fading back into the mist. "They're going home," Grandfather said one morning as we watched a procession of these spectral figures make their way from the mill ruins across the pond and towards the row houses on the opposite bank. "They walked the path, they walked in life, but their homes are not empty." He explained the true horror. The spirits weren't just haunting the houses. They were merging. In the fog, in that place between, the boundary between the living and the dead became permeable. A spirit, desperate for the warmth of life, could slip into the body of a sleeping descendant. They weren't possessing them in the way of demons in stories. It was more like a cohabitation, a shared dream, a lingering influence. The living would wake with strange urges, a longing to work, a loom that no longer existed, a flicker of a memory of a life not their own, a sadness that belonged to another century. The fog was their bridge. I didn't fully believe him until the winter I turned 16. Grandfather had passed the year before, and I was alone in his shack cataloging his things. A thick, unnatural fog settled over the pond, denser than I'd ever seen. It wasn't just on the water. It seeped under the door, through the window frames, filling the room with a cold, damp breath. And in that fog, I saw my grandfather. He was standing by the wood stove, as solid as he'd ever been in life. But his eyes were different. They were deep, ancient pools that held not just him, but countless others. He smiled, a sad, weary smile. "Don't be afraid, little bird," his voice echoed, sounding like it came from a great distance. "I'm just visiting." Then I saw them. Behind him, crowding the doorway, filling the corners of the room, were the others. The mill workers, dozens of them. Their faces were peaceful, but their need was a palpable weight in the air. They were all pressing forward, drawn to the warmth of my living body, to the anchor of my heartbeat. The room grew impossibly cold. Grandfather held up a hand, stopping them. "She is not for you," he said, his voice firm. "This one is mine." He looked at me, and for a moment his eyes were his own kind, wise and full of love. "The fog is thick tonight, Leah. They are hungry for life. Remember the smudged sticks, remember the prayers, and never forget that you live in the place between. They will always be waiting." The fog receded as quickly as it had come, pulling back through the door and the windows, taking the spectral crowd with it. I was left shivering in the sudden silence, the lingering scent of the fog, a smell of damp earth and old iron, the only proof of what I had seen. I still live by Nichols Pond. I am a biologist now. I study the water, the amphibians, the delicate ecosystem. But I know what else lives here. On foggy mornings, I see them still, walking across the water. I feel their gaze on my back. I hear the faint, distant clatter of looms that have been silent for a century. I keep Grandfather's teachings close, and I never, ever go out in the fog, because I know the truth. The fog is not just water vapor. It is a veil. And on the other side of that veil, the ones who wait are always watching, always patient, always longing to come home.